The day began like any other. The usual chaos of the last school bell filling the hallways as students burst from classrooms eager to escape the confines of learning. Laughter bounced off the lockers, shoes squeaked against the waxed floors, and backpacks slapped rhythmically against backs as everyone rushed out into the late afternoon sun. I moved a bit slower than the others, dragging my feet, not because I was tired, but because I knew what awaited me outside. A long walk home. My phone buzzed in my hand. A message from Dad. "Can't make it. Stuck at work. Be safe." Earlier that morning, Mum had texted that her flight was delayed and she wouldn't be back until late. Just like that, I was on my own. I didn't panic. I mean, I was old enough to walk home. It wasn't like I hadn't done it before. But it had been years. I couldn't even remember the last time I had walked that route alone. Maybe 6th grade? 7th? Ever since Dad's schedule changed, someone had always been there to pick me up. It had become routine, almost expected. So the idea of walking home felt strange, unsettling even, like wearing a pair of shoes you hadn't put on in years and suddenly realizing they didn't fit the same way. The weather wasn't helping. Though it was only the beginning of fall, the wind carried a sharp edge that felt like winter's warning. Grey clouds drifted overhead, thick and low, dimming the sunlight until everything looked muted and colourless. I pulled my hoodie tight and stepped out of the school's front doors, watching as group after group peeled off into their usual directions. Some walking in pairs, others getting into cars, a few hopping on bikes. I stood there for a moment, taking it all in, the normalcy of it. For them, this was just another Thursday. For me, it felt like something else entirely. The route home wasn't complex, but it wasn't exactly straightforward either. The quickest path would take me through a few narrow streets and eventually past the wooded area on the edge of town, the same woods everyone whispered about during lunch or when the power flickered during storms. Stories of strange sightings, old legends, and missing pets always seemed to center around that patch of forest. I never paid much attention to them. Kids talk, they exaggerate. Still, walking past that place alone made my stomach knot up in ways I didn't expect. I took a deep breath and started walking, trying to shake off the weird feeling building in my chest. Each step echoed a little louder than it should have. Maybe it was the silence. There weren't many people on foot at that hour. The residential streets I passed were mostly empty, the occasional curtain shifting in a window, a dog barking behind a fence, but not much else. It felt like the world had paused, just for a second, just for me. I tried to distract myself, staring at the cracked sidewalks, the familiar landmarks, the leaning mailbox on Parker Street, the rusted swing set in the vacant lot, the streetlight that flickered during the day for no reason. But the distraction didn't help. The walk, which should have felt like a peaceful solo journey, instead started to feel like a countdown. Like I was heading somewhere I wasn't supposed to go, and each step was one step too far. I kept looking over my shoulder, not because I thought someone was following me, at least not yet, but because the air behind me felt heavy, charged, like a storm was building, not in the sky, but in the space around me. I told myself I was being paranoid, that it was just the unfamiliarity of being alone after so long. But the feeling didn't go away. It grew. With every house I passed, every corner I turned, the world seemed quieter, emptier, wrong. The longer I walked, the more aware I became of the stillness around me. It wasn't just the quiet of an empty neighborhood, it was deeper than that. An unnatural kind of silence that made the hairs on my arms rise. The kind of silence where even the wind seems to hold its breath. I told myself it was just the time of day, that weird lull between the school rush and when people come home from work. But my steps felt too loud against the sidewalk. Each one echoed in my ears like a hammer strike, and then I noticed something that stopped me cold. I could hear footsteps, but they weren't mine. At first, I thought I imagined it. Maybe it was the slap of my own shoes bouncing off the houses, making strange echoes. I slowed down, listening closely. My heart beat a little faster as I walked forward again, carefully placing each step. Then I heard it. Another step. A fraction of a second behind mine. Too perfectly timed to be a coincidence. It sounded faint. Soft. Like someone deliberately trying not to be heard. The kind of step you take when you're sneaking up on someone. I stopped walking entirely, pretending to check my phone, holding my breath as I listened. Nothing. Only silence. I turned around, slowly. The street was empty. Nothing but trimmed hedges, parked cars, and swaying tree branches in the distance. There was no one behind me, not a soul. I gave a nervous laugh, one of those weak, forced chuckles you let out when you're trying to convince yourself you're being ridiculous. I shook my head and kept walking, but this time I was hyper-aware. Every sound, every leaf that rustled, every car in the distance, I noticed it all, and then the footsteps started again, light, deliberate, following. I didn't turn around this time. I was too afraid to. My pulse was pounding in my ears now, and it was hard to tell whether the footsteps were real or if my imagination was creating them. I increased my pace just a bit. Not enough to make it obvious, but enough to test whatever might be behind me. The footsteps responded in kind. A second behind me, matching my rhythm, just slightly off. I couldn't help it. I spun around again. Nothing. No one. Just the street, stretching behind me, empty and grey under the fading sky. I stood frozen for a moment, then slowly backed up a few steps, keeping my eyes on the path behind me. Still nothing moved. I told myself, it must have been a bird, or maybe the shifting branches of a tree, or some neighborhood kid messing around. But none of those explanations made sense. The steps had sounded too human, too real. I turned back around and kept walking, a little faster now, gripping the straps of my backpack like they could somehow protect me. With every step I took, the feeling in my chest grew heavier. That prickling sensation on the back of my neck wouldn't go away. My instincts were screaming, telling me that I wasn't alone, that something, or someone, was watching, following. I resisted the urge to break into a run. I didn't want to give away my fear. I didn't want whatever was behind me to know it had gotten to me. I thought if I just kept walking, if I stayed, calm, maybe it would go away. Maybe it would stop. But the steps kept coming, matching mine, always just behind, close enough that I felt like I could reach out and touch whatever was there if I dared. I didn't dare. I didn't look back again. I just kept walking, faster, heart pounding, ears straining to hear what shouldn't be there. Every sound around me began to feel distorted, like I was moving through water or a dream that teetered on the edge of turning into a nightmare. I passed familiar houses that no longer felt safe, trees I used to climb as a kid that now loomed like silent watchers. Nothing looked the same anymore. Everything felt wrong. I was nearly halfway home when it happened. My feet had fallen into a steady rhythm, fast enough to put distance between me and whatever I imagined was behind me, but not fast enough to draw attention. I kept my head down, eyes darting from the sidewalk cracks to the shifting shadows on the side of the road. My ears were straining for any sound, any clue that I wasn't alone. That's when a voice spoke. You dropped something. It was soft, calm, too calm, like someone who wasn't. Surprised to see me, someone who had been watching. I stopped dead in my tracks, my breath caught in my throat, and my blood turned cold. The voice hadn't come from far away. It wasn't shouted or called out from a porch or window. It had come from right behind me, close enough that I should have felt someone's breath on my neck. Close enough that if I turned, I expected to come face to face with whoever or whatever had spoken. I turned around slowly, every muscle in my body tensed, every instinct screaming. But the street was empty. There was no one there, not a single person in sight. No open doors, no passing cars, nothing but still air and fading light. The wind had picked up slightly, But it didn't move the trees or the leaves the way it should have. Everything was unnaturally still, like the world was holding its breath. Then I looked down. There, on the cracked pavement at my feet, lay my house key. It was unmistakably mine, faded green keychain, small silver tag with my name scratched into it, the faint red ink of a once bright sticker now barely visible. But I hadn't taken it out. I hadn't even touched it. My backpack was zipped. I hadn't reached for anything. There was no reason for it to be there. I stared at the key like it was something foreign, something cursed. For a moment, I didn't move. My mind raced through every logical explanation I could think of. Maybe it had fallen through a hole in the fabric. Maybe the zipper was loose and it slipped out without me noticing. Maybe, just maybe, it had been in my hand the whole time and I dropped it without realizing. But none of those thoughts made sense. Not when paired with the voice. Not when the voice had said something first. You dropped something. How would they have known? I knelt slowly, my fingers trembling as I reached for the key. The metal was colder than it should have been, ice cold, like it had been sitting in a freezer. I snatched it up quickly, shoving it deep into my coat pocket, making sure this time it couldn't escape. I stood back up and looked around again, half expecting someone to be there now, standing in the distance, watching me with a smile or no expression at all. But there was still no one. The street remained empty, and yet I knew someone had spoken. I hadn't imagined it. The voice was too clear, too close. I could still hear the words echoing in my ears, repeating over and over like a whisper buried just beneath the wind. My thoughts spun in every direction. Maybe I was being messed with. Maybe someone had been hiding and ran. Maybe I was losing my mind. But deep down, I knew none of those things were true. Something wanted me to stop. Something wanted me to turn around. And something wanted me to pick up that key. I didn't know how long I had been walking after that moment. Time had started to lose its meaning, becoming warped by fear and confusion. All I knew was that every nerve in my body was screaming, telling me to get home, to get somewhere safe, to get away. My legs moved faster on their own, driven by adrenaline and something primal, something older than logic. I no longer cared about appearing calm or collected. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. I gripped the house, key tight in my pocket, its icy surface biting into my skin, reminding me that none of this was in my head. My shoes slapped hard against the pavement, each step louder than the last. There was no mistaking it now. Something was behind me. I didn't hear it clearly anymore. Not like before, but I could feel it. A pressure, a presence. Like something was just out of sight, staying in the corners of my vision no matter how fast I moved. The shadows seemed longer now, darker, and the light around me had taken on a strange hue, as though the sun had dipped below the horizon without warning. My surroundings, once familiar, no longer offered comfort. Every house I passed looked different. The windows too dark, the doors too still. I saw no lights turning on, no people stepping outside, not even a flicker of a TV glow from within. It felt like the world had emptied itself out and left me behind, to walk alone with whatever had chosen to follow me. The road ahead stretched on endlessly, curving in a way I didn't remember. I could swear I had walked this route before many times, but now it looked like a place I had never seen. I didn't stop to question it. I couldn't. I picked up speed. My walk turned into a jog, my jog into a full sprint. I didn't look back. I couldn't look back. Something told me that if I turned around again, I wouldn't be able to look away. That if I saw what was behind me, it would change everything. So I kept my eyes forward, locking them on the one familiar thing left. The distant outline of my house at the end of the street. A tiny silhouette in a world that had gone strange, but it was my destination, my escape. Every step took me closer, but also deeper into a feeling I couldn't shake. That I wasn't racing towards safety. I was racing away from something. Something that was getting closer. The air around me felt thick, like it was pressing in from all sides. My breaths came in short gasps, And even though I was moving fast, I felt like I wasn't going anywhere. Like the distance between me and my front door never changed, no matter how hard I pushed my legs. The sounds of the world had vanished. No birds, no cars, no rustling leaves. Just the pounding of my footsteps and the sound of my own panicked breathing. It was like I was trapped in a space between places, a forgotten stretch of road that existed only for this moment, for this chase. As I approached the front gate of my yard, I finally allowed myself to slow down just enough to fumble for the key in my pocket. My hands were slick with sweat, shaking uncontrollably. I looked over my shoulder, not directly, just a glance. And I didn't see anything, but I felt it. The sense that something had stopped moving the moment I did. That something was waiting, watching, holding its breath just as I was holding mine. I turned back to the door, still running, fingers gripping the cold metal key so tightly that it dug into my skin. I just had to get inside. I just had to reach the lock. I just had to get the door open before whatever was behind me decided it didn't want to follow anymore. It wanted in. The moment I reached the front door, I nearly dropped the key. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely fit it into the lock. It took several tries, each one more frantic than the last, before the key finally slid in. I could feel the cold sweat running down my back as I turned it, the metallic click sounding louder than it ever had before. My breath caught in my throat as I pushed the door open and stumbled inside, slamming it shut behind me. But I didn't feel safe. Not yet. My fingers fumbled with the lock on the inside, twisting and bolting it as fast as I could, then leaning against the door, like my weight alone would be enough to keep something out. The hallway was dim, lit only by the fading light coming through the front window. The silence inside the house wasn't any more comforting than the silence outside. It felt unnatural, like everything was waiting, paused. I stood there, frozen, listening for any sound from outside, but there was nothing. No footsteps, no voice, no movement, but the heaviness remained, pressing against the walls, thick in the air, making it hard to breathe. I stepped away from the door, my legs weak, my body shaky. I tried to tell myself I was overreacting. That fear had gotten the best of me, but deep down I knew that wasn't true. Something had followed me. Something was still out there. I made my way slowly down the hall, glancing over my shoulder with every step. Every creak of the floorboard made my heart jump. The shadows stretched longer inside the house than they should have, like they were reaching out, crawling toward me. I moved from room to room, flipping on lights, checking behind curtains, under tables, inside closets, even though I knew I wouldn't find anything. But I had to look. I had to convince myself I was still in control, still safe in my own home, but nothing about the house felt normal. The light switches made a soft clicking sound, but the lights flickered before staying on, casting a pale, uneven glow. I stood in the middle of the living room, staring at the front door from across the hallway. I expected it to swing open on its own, to reveal something standing there, waiting. My hands were still trembling as I pulled out my phone to check the time, only to find the screen frozen, unresponsive. I pressed the buttons again and again, but nothing happened. The screen finally lit up, but the time was wrong. It showed a time that hadn't come yet, like my phone had skipped forward on its own. I backed away from the screen slowly, trying to make sense of the sudden chill in the room. It wasn't the kind of cold that came from a draft or open window. It was deeper than that. The kind of cold that sank into your bones, that made your breath fog even when the air didn't feel like winter. I turned toward the hallway and froze. The front door was still locked, still closed, but the shadow beneath it was changing. It wasn't just from the fading daylight. It was shifting, moving, like something on the other side was pacing back and forth. I couldn't hear anything, but I knew something was there. I took a step back, then another, not taking my eyes off the bottom of the door. My chest tightened. My heart beat louder than ever. I didn't want to get closer. I didn't want to speak. I didn't even want to breathe too loudly. My whole body screamed to run, but there was nowhere left to go. I was inside. I was supposed to be safe. But safety is a feeling, and right now, that feeling was gone. Something had followed me all the way here. It hadn't stopped at the street. It hadn't disappeared when I shut the door. It was still outside. Maybe it had always been there. Maybe it had been waiting all along.